The HIV epidemic in the 1980s ravaged through the country and left the gay community completely scarred. When people think about Ronald Reagan, they think about economic success. But what people don't seem to remember is how he left the gay community behind during their darkest time. Even the newer generations of the gay community don't seem to know much about what happened back then. Well, Pat and I, aka the gays, are here to spill the facts and let you know what the gays should think about the HIV epidemic.
Ugh, back at it.
Back at it again.
I can't believe it. It's like I haven't seen you in a matter of seconds since we last recorded something.
Seconds. Well, we've been continuously on the phone with each other, though, so you still have... It's been microseconds since you've seen me.
Microseconds. Oh, great. Well, welcome to another riveting episode of What Do the Gays Think?
What do the gays think? It's a very important question.
Yeah, today, what do the gays think about the HIV epidemic versus the COVID pandemic?
Oh, we're going to be comparing the two.
Yes, comparing sizes, shapes,
length,
girth, all of the important dimensions that you measure a virus by, we will be talking about today.
Right, because, in the last episode that we talked about vaccines in, we did bring up HIV and, why they don't have a vaccine for it.
Still not quite certain about that yet. It's real tricky. That's what it is. It's real tricky.
It's a tricky little bastard, a tricky virus.
Yeah. So, but I do go over that a little bit.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Pat's going to be our teacher today to teach us about the HIV epidemic and how, the Ronald Reagan administration handled all that, right?
Yes. It's going to be a lot because, okay, so for people who don't know, the HIV virus, not the epidemic per se, but the virus itself was first described, or at least the first cases were described in 1981. So there's a lot of history from today all the way back then. So there was a lot to cover, which I apparently thought, I could fit it all in an hour, of course, which wasn't true at all. But the reason I wanted to compare the two was because there was a Q&A with Dr. Fauci, who actually was involved in both the HIV epidemic and the COVID pandemic.
So old, people, God.
He could still hit it. I mean, he's still got it. Have you seen the man up there talking about data? He's like, I want randomized studies. And I'm like, me too.
Me too. You know what? I agree.
Oh my God, the man is just...
Dr. Fauci could get it. Anyway,
before I get lost in the sauce of Dr. Fauci. Okay, so there was this conversation, so I just want to read a bit from it, because he compares HIV to COVID, and that's what got me down this rabbit hole. So I don't know who gave this conversation with him. It's some random dude. But this is what he said, because he was asked about, can you describe, the common themes or the differences between the two. He said, the common denominator is that they both started off as a new virus that the human species had never had any experience with. The differences are profound. One difference is that COVID is highly efficiently transmitted from person to person by the respiratory route, which makes it very difficult to prevent from getting infected, except by doing draconian things that we've done with COVID-19, namely, essentially shutting down your country, lock it down, have physical separation that you don't transmit because you're not physically close enough to transmit a respiratory infection. That is a very, very profound and draconian way of blocking infection. HIV, although its impact is enormous with over 80 million infections and over 37 million deaths,
here we go,
and still over 1 million people getting infected each year, is so different because it's insidious. It started off slow. When it started off, we saw the tip of the iceberg, not realizing that many more people were infected than we were actually seeing getting sick. So I was like, oh my God. And then I was like, oh my God, he was involved in both of these scenarios. So it'd be cool to compare them. Now, obviously, they're two vastly different viruses, vastly different epidemiologies in terms of its infection, in terms of the disease or symptoms it presents, whatever. But the timelines are are somewhat similar and somewhat different. I think those similarities and differences kind of speak to the problems that we still have today with dealing with viruses and some of the things that we've been able to fix or accomplish since the HIV epidemic.
Right. And I think that goes to show, the reason why we had to shut down the country in the first place is because of the way COVID-19 was being transmitted, as opposed to, we didn't have to shut down the country for HIV.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll get into the how they, well, not the how, but like the when they figured out it wasn't, transmitted by air or stuff like that. But so this was the conversation. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. What's even more interesting is that the difference between epidemic and pandemic, and why I think that the HIV problem should be considered a pandemic, but apparently they don't define it as that.
Right.
So an epidemic is a disease that affects a large number of people within a community, population, or region. So you can think of the epidemic affecting the gay community back in the 80s, specifically before we knew it could be transmitted to other people, because all of the cases for a while were gay men getting the disease. Whereas a pandemic, it is an epidemic that then spreads to multiple countries or continents.
Right.
But HIV is a problem globally, especially in Africa. So I'm thinking the whole epidemic word is nonsense, and it really is a pandemic. But that's really just semantics. So it doesn't.
Do you think it's still a pandemic, or was it a pandemic back in the 1980s and we've more or less controlled it?
I think, well, you still have, like I just said with the quote for Dr. Fauci, you still have over 1 million people getting infected each year. I think that's definitely, it's still up there. Yeah. I think there are a lot better treatments now. Like in terms of treatment plans for COVID versus HIV, the HIV treatment plans are way more effective, and you can live with HIV and be, the whole undetected equals untransmittable kind of thing. So if your viral load isn't detectable, you can't actually transmit the virus to a partner that doesn't have HIV. So I still think it's a huge problem. It's just the semantics of, is it an epidemic? Is it a pandemic? Regardless, it's terrible. It's terrible and we need to fix it. So, yeah.
So for people who may not know, or people who may not be in the LGBT community and may not know what HIV is.
I hope they do. God, I hope they do.
You'd hope, but some people are just not aware of certain things. Like the HIV virus is a lot more prevalent in the gay community, even though anyone can get it. But so what is it? What is HIV?
The human immunodeficiency virus, of course. So it's a virus. It's specifically a retrovirus. So that means that when it infects your cell, the protein code breaks down and it reveals that it has RNA as its genetic information. So the reason why it's called a retrovirus is because it needs something called reverse transcriptase to basically turn that RNA into DNA. So normally you go DNA, RNA, protein. This is starting from RNA, turning back to DNA, which then will make RNA, which makes protein, which then forms more viruses, and then, of course, spreads throughout your body. And the reason it's called the human immunodeficiency virus is because it really dampens and hurts your immune system. The exact mode of action, I kind of tried to understand but couldn't, because I'm not a doctor. But basically, it really hurts your immune system by, I believe it's damaging the production of healthy antibodies. Of course, I could go into a whole other episode about it if I take the time to review it. So maybe I will. Maybe I'll get very medical. But right now, I just want to more talk about the timeline of events, because it's more, it's haunting. The timeline of events. Honestly, it's haunting as you compare the two. So
all right. Let's go into that.
Okay.
Lay it out for me.
Here we go. It's 1981. It's June 5th.
Who's the president? Ronald Reagan?
Yeah, Reagan is the president by now.
Fuck.
Because he got in, I think, in 1981, January, whatever.
Right.
So June 5th, the CDC publishes an article about 5 young, white, previously healthy gay men who have this rare lung infection caused by pneumocystis carinii. It's like a type of, you get a pneumonia, I think, from it. And their immune systems were not fighting it off. So they were kind of sick. And so CDC published this article. That was June 5th. So by July 3rd, the phrase gay cancer enters the public lexicon. So the running theme of this whole thing is gay people are stigmatized for, obviously, this virus, this disease, because back then they didn't know it was a virus, but this disease is perceived as a specifically gay disease. So you're going to hear things like gay cancer, which isn't great.
Gay cancer.
Gay cancer, gay pneumonia. But by the end of 1981, you have 337 reported cases of gay cancer, like, you know, this weird illness that they don't know what the hell's going on.
Right. Let's draw a comparison to, you know, people calling COVID the China virus.
We're gonna get into it. I was reading this and I was like, oh, there's too many similarities. So then we jump to 1982, and by May 11th, there's published for the first time is the word GRID for gay-related immune deficiency. So they've kind of classified the disease, specifying that it's gay-related, which, you know, isn't great because it stigmatized a whole group of people.
Right.
But back then, the scientists were like, hey, we're only seeing it in, you know, gay men. But it deepened the public perception that AIDS that we know it now is only affecting gay men. So not good.
Not good.
But it's better because by September 24th, so by the end of 1982 or close to it, the CDC is using the term AIDS to describe the disease. So acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
Right.
The difference between HIV and AIDS obviously is basically how good your immune system is. So when you can live with HIV and you can live with AIDS, but you're considered to be in AIDS, suffering from that syndrome when your immune system is just plummeting, and you are very susceptible to just any sort of infection. Right. Even the smallest infections by some of the most common bacteria, whatever, can really hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
So then by September 28th, 1982 still, these two representatives introduced the first legislation to allocate funding for AIDS research. Great.
Oh, wonderful.
It died in the committee, and they couldn't actually get new funding for AIDS research until 1983. So from 1981 to 1983, July of 1983, there was just no funding for research. So individual, you know, hospitals were probably trying to do something about it, but no one at the federal level was actually looking into any sort of treatment for this.
And was this like public knowledge?
The virus, or like the sickness?
The sickness, illness? The illness, like what would the average person know about this?
By 1982, yeah, I mean, it was affecting a lot of people I think the first kind of studies were, or at least the cases were seen in California. So there's a lot of big gay communities over there. So if you lived over there, you definitely knew about it. But if it's going to Congress to get funding, I'm going to assume, you know, I don't know if everyone's tapped into politics like we are now, but, you know, I think by then, especially in the medical field, it is very well known. It's also because a lot of the doctors and researchers didn't know what the hell it was.
Right.
Especially because it was presenting in a variety of ways, because sometimes people would get the pneumonia. Sometimes you would be more predisposed to actually getting cancer, which is why they called it gay cancer. But I think by 1982, especially 1983, it was very public knowledge what this was. So then 1982 was over. And then we get to 1983, March 4th. Oh, they're really doing their best here, but it's really not great for people. They're talking about, the CDC has another article about who's at risk, and the 4 H's come out. So the first H is obviously homosexual.
Homosexuals, here we go.
The second H is for heroin. It's really describing anyone who does intravenous drugs, so people who needle share. Haitians, because there was a large proportion of Haitians that were testing positive, or at least didn't have the test yet, but are having the symptoms of this virus. And then people with hemophilia, because if you have hemophilia, you can readily get blood transfusions, and if you get tainted blood, you get the virus, obviously. So the 4 H's came out, which not only further stigmatized homosexuals, but then stigmatized all these other people. So it's just taking L's everywhere.
Not only is it gay cancer, it is now also Haitian cancer.
Yes. But then by May 18th, Congress passes the first bill that specifically has funding for AIDS research, which was $12 million, which obviously look at today's standards, that's like nothing. But the funding does increase over time, thankfully.
Well,
then,
I mean, I guess in 1980 that much money was different then.
Yeah. So by our standards now, like if someone came to the floor and was like, "Hey, can I give you 12 million for COVID relief?" They'd be like,
The fuck.
"What? Like, that's not gonna do it. So drop in the bucket. Like, you gotta pony up some more money." Then by 1984, in April, the National Cancer Institute kind of discovers it's a retrovirus. So they haven't named it HIV yet. They had a different name for it, but it's funny just because shortly before this, in 1983, there was like a French group that discovered it as well, and then there's all this like fighting back and forth between who should get credit. Not relevant, but I just want to make it known that the French discovered it first, apparently. So,
who gets credit for naming this deadly virus?
The only people who get credit are the people who cure it or create the vaccine. I don't care who discovers it.
Oh, tell them. Spill the tea.
Spill it. So then, 1984, we get the news that it's a retrovirus. So that's cool. Still no idea how we're going to deal with it. 1985, we get our first way to test it, the commercial way to test it. So it's able to spread a lot faster. The testing, not the virus. The testing spreads a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And here we go. This is where it gets so great. 1985. So it starts in 1981. 4 years later, 85. First time Ronald Reagan just mentions it publicly.
Oh, here we go.
He calls it a top priority, which is nice. But he's been in office since 1981.
And he's just now mentioning it.
Yeah. So we're going to give him a little time because, it wasn't immediately in 1981 a problem. So let's just say we'll give him 3 years instead of 4 years. It's been around. Still hasn't mentioned it till just then. And the question came up of budgeting and like how much money he's going to put towards it. And he's like, I think we've put enough towards it. It's like a budgetary constraint. You can't put too much money towards it. 3 years? And
right.
Anyway, I just, because I was like, imagine in today's world, COVID happens. Trump waits 3 years to talk about it. Like, of course he wouldn't because he wants to talk about everything. But imagine the man, like 3 years, it's affecting a minority group. It's not important. And then, of course, as it's getting worse and worse, then he finally has the balls to mention it. So obviously right. I don't like Ronald Reagan.
Well, I mean, if you work off the assumption that I obviously wasn't around back then, maybe some people listening were around back then, but if you're under the assumption that this was, public knowledge and that it was, people were worried about it, or, well, I guess, if it was only affecting a certain community, maybe some people weren't worried about it, and that's why it wasn't maybe like this big public thing that everyone was worrying about, kind of like how COVID is, because obviously anybody can get COVID. If it was only affecting this one community, why should other people care, I guess? And maybe that's why Ronald Reagan took 3 years to mention it.
Yeah, I guess it just wasn't on his list. It wasn't on his radar.
Yeah.
But speaking of public perception of it, by December 19th of that year, 1985, the LA Times did a poll that found most Americans favored quarantining those who have AIDS. So by then, it's definitely public knowledge. If they're able to poll that, hopefully it's a good poll. If they're able to poll that, enough people and they're supporting quarantining, because obviously they don't know how it spreads still. But it seems that public knowledge at least is there, that they know what it is, and they'd want people to quarantine. As opposed to today,
right?
We have so many people who just know that this is way more infectious than HIV in terms of its route of transmission. Yet they're like, we don't need masks. We don't need quarantining.
No quarantine, what? No.
Okay, so 1986. We're going to speed through these because we got to get to COVID.
Yes, tell me.
This reminded me once again of COVID stuff. CDC reports that AIDS cases are disproportionately affecting African American and Latinx members of communities and groups. So obviously there is a through line here of minorities not being able to access the best healthcare, yada, 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 living in disproportionately lower income areas. So, I feel like no matter what illness you look at, you're going to see the minority groups get fucked over way more.
Right.
Because this country is not built to help them as it is built to help white people.
Oh,
That's not shocking. If anyone's shocked by that, I'm sorry. Uh, so
yes.
then 1987, so now we're 6 years into this whole thing, and we finally get the first medication called AZT. So it's an antiretroviral drug. So that whole reverse transcriptase protein that I mentioned before,
Mm-hmm.
that converts the RNA to DNA, AZT acts to block it. Thankfully, humans don't have reverse transcriptases really, at least none that I know of. So we're not going to be affected by it. It's a great antiretroviral, and so it should stop the viral RNA from going to DNA, and then it won't produce any new viruses that way. So then your viral load is kept low. Unfortunately, resistance to the drug was found. Just like any drug, you get resistance to eventually.
Great. Is that because the HIV virus started to mutate to develop those resistances, or?
Oh yeah. So like fun fact. Great. Humans, most like higher level organisms, mammals and plants and shit.
Right.
They have ways of proofreading their DNA to like make sure no mistakes were made. Because when your cells divide, you replicate your DNA, so each cell has a new copy of DNA. Unfortunately, sometimes you make errors, your body doesn't copy it correctly. So it has ways of like looking over the DNA to make sure everything's fine. Viruses don't have any proofreading mechanism, so whatever mistakes they make, they kind of just keep. And sometimes they're deleterious, meaning that like it just kills it, like it can't do anything anymore because it's fucked itself so much.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some that some changes that happen through random mutation or just random mistakes that are made that actually are beneficial. So from my opinion, if you were going to get resistance to something that targets a protein, the sequence that makes the protein probably changed, so then the protein changed. And if the protein changes its shape enough, the drug AZT probably wasn't affecting it.
So it's kind of like natural selection.
Yeah.
Except for. Yeah.
Yes. And if I do an antibiotic episode, the more selective pressure you put on an organism, the faster you're going to make that organism basically adapt to survive under those conditions, or select those organisms within that population that can survive under that condition.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like 100 viruses and you apply some like really good antiretroviral, it's going to just naturally select, why it's called natural selection. It's going to naturally select the viruses in that population that can survive under it, whose
Right.
reverse transcriptase protein slightly different than the other ones. So but anyway, we had our first antiretroviral drug. Great.
So do you think, just out of curiosity, do you think that eventually COVID will develop resistances to these, like, things that I forget what they're called, like remdesivir or Regeneron or those types of things. Do you think COVID would eventually develop a resistance to those?
It could, yeah. I mean, I'll get into this when I get into like the current drugs for HIV, but it's all about how you prescribe the drugs. It's about, do you hit it hard and hit it fast in terms of prescribing like a lot of it just to kind of kill as much of the virus inside your body as possible, or do you look for like the long-term care effect of like prescribing a specific medication for this long and then switching to another one and then switching to another. But I'll get more to that later. But yeah, I think it's totally possible if you overprescribe medicine for it. Mm-hmm. Like if everyone's just like, oh, get remdesivir or whatever, and take like a crap ton of it, and great, it works for a while, but then you're going to select for those viruses that it doesn't work as well on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I hear Ace or Kai barking in the background.
Yeah. Everyone can hear them now. Great. They're special guests on today's episode.
Oh. I wish we could see them.
No.
I
still have so much to get through. I just want everyone to know about HIV.
Yes. COVID. Sorry, I keep interbutting with questions.
No, I love it. I want to have the discussion. 1987, May 31st, Reagan makes the first public speech about AIDS. So this first whole speech about AIDS itself, not just mentioning it in passing. Mm-hmm. So that's 1987, 6 years later. 6 years. And that means he was up for re-election in the interim and still won, no matter how badly he mishandled this in his first term. So
Yep.
He went on and on. Basically, it was like, we're gonna have a vaccine in the 90s.
Yeah, that worked out well, didn't it?
He had a lot to say, but I think the best thing was actually a kind of nice thing he said was, the federal role is to provide scientific, factual information. And I was like, could you imagine? Could you imagine living in a society where the government thinks that they should provide scientific, factual information?
Oh my God. Imagine if that was today.
Like, he's an asshole for not handling this well, but at least on the surface, it looked like he had it under control.
Right.
Whereas from surface and skin, like everywhere, every possible way, he's fucked this up completely. Oh my God. But that speech, yeah, he's talking about how, like, we got to do more for society to prevent transmission of the virus. Like, if you think you're sick, you have to take the steps necessary to not spread it. And I'm like, yeah, quarantine.
Sounds familiar.
right now. Like, take the 2 weeks out of your day and don't go outside.
Sounds very familiar.
But then in 1989, by the end of the decade, so it's 1981, 1989, Dr. Fauci, my husband,
husbando,
endorses giving HIV positive people who do not qualify for clinical trials access to experimental treatments. So he wants to just kind of get it all out there, try to test as much as possible.
Right.
And it is by the end of the decade that the number of reported cases of AIDS reaches 100,000. Not great, obviously.
Number of cases, not number of deaths.
Number of cases, right. 1992, AIDS becomes the number one cause of death of men between 25 and 44. Yikes. In the country of anything, AIDS is now the worst thing. Like, I didn't even know. Half of this stuff I didn't know. And I'm like, should be bigger news. I don't know. Maybe.
That's a big yikes, though.
This gets worse. 1994, the year I was born, the year you were born.
Yeah, the year we were both born. AIDS what a blessing of a year that was.
Oh, you're not going to think so. AIDS becomes the leading cause of death of all Americans, ages 25 to 54. Or 44, sorry. 25 to 44. All Americans, the leading cause of death is AIDS.
My God.
My God.
No, it's just amazing to me that, that this could have been handled a lot better during, Ronald Reagan's administration.
I mean, didn't have all the information, obviously. Science wasn't at the level it is today, of course.
Right, but like if it was handled better, or if they paid more attention to it, could we have gotten that problem down?
Oh, I sure hope so. I mean, by 1995, 500,000 cases had been reported in the U.S.
500,000.
So, from 1989 to 1995, so a 6-year difference, 5 times the amount of cases in 6 years, which is a lot.
But you said at the beginning of this that 1 million Americans are getting this per year, right? Now, currently. That's terrifying.
I know. I mean, thankfully, our country that's not a stat for our country. Like it's globally, so you take into all countries. But still,
okay.
Thankfully, by 1996, the number of new cases being diagnosed clients for the first time ever in 15 years, which is great. I love that. 1991, the World Health Organization announces that AIDS has become the fourth biggest killer worldwide and number 1 in Africa. So this is still, even today, a huge problem in Africa. And that's probably where a lot of that now, like, million new cases a year comes from, just because obviously population is huge in Africa when you comprise all the countries together.
Right. And, that has also developed the kind of new stigma about AIDS and, Africaners.
Yes.
Also very racist.
Oh yeah, it's racist, homophobic, transphobic, all of it. All of that.
There's like an inherent problem with assigning a virus or a disease to a specific group of people, because then you develop a stigma.
Tell me about that. Why does that sound familiar? I can't.
Oh, it's like in the back of my head, just rattling on back there. Like, I don't know why it's so prevalent right now in my mind.
2002. We have the first rapid test, which I've taken before. It's really easy. It's like a little prick, and then they just incubate it, and you get your results.
Mm-hmm.
And then by 2007, the CDC reports over 565,000 people have died in the US because of AIDS since 1981. Now, to put this in perspective, that's 26 years since the virus was first kind of characterized, found out. In 26 years, you have 565,000 people dead of AIDS in the US. In less than 1 year of COVID, you have 230,000 people roughly dead in the US. So that's like a little less than half,
Right.
but in less than a year. So obviously, these numbers by themselves are very misleading because it doesn't take into account the mode of transmission, how infectious, how deadly it is. Obviously, COVID is way more infectious and in the short term, very deadly.
Right.
So it makes sense that there's such a high percent of the population is dead because of it. Obviously, if we had been doing what we were supposed to do, that number could have been much lower, but we weren't.
Yeah, but so, how many people did you say were dying per year from HIV?
Oh God, you mean currently?
Yeah, currently.
Let me scroll up to my notes and stuff. Oh, I don't know. Do I have the stat? I have the infection stat. I don't know if I have the death stat. I'll probably find it out though.
Well, because obviously it's not the number one killer now, right?
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Current. Oh my God, this is so easy. I love the internet. About 13,000 people with AIDS in the United States die each year. Still not as low as I'd like it. I'd like it to be zero.
We'd all like it to be zero. We would love for a cure, but
obviously that's a lot lower than COVID currently, which is because we've had so many years to develop therapies to allow you to live with HIV. It's not nearly as virulent as COVID.
Right, but it was you talk with people who were around back then, and especially people who were in the gay community, and everyone says that everyone knew at least one other person that had died from it, and it's like, imagine it. I mean, I don't know anyone personally that had died from COVID. Everyone so far in my family has been pretty good about quarantining and trying not to catch the virus,
as people should.
As people should. So I don't know anybody who's personally died from COVID, but just like imagine if everyone knew at least one other person that had died. You think we'd take it more seriously?
That's why Joe Biden, every time he has a speech, he's like, people are looking around the table, seeing one less person than at the table because they've died of COVID. I mean, I know two people. I know one person at least that's died from COVID, and it's like, if it doesn't affect you, it's just like whatever. Like a lot of people have that mentality, if it's just affecting the gays, whatever.
I think a lot of people have that mentality in it. If something doesn't directly impact you, therefore I do not care about it. Like, that's a mentality that a lot of people have, and I think it's one of the main reasons people will not try to deal with homelessness or problems that may permeate into lower socioeconomic communities. People don't want to deal with those problems because it doesn't impact them at all. So why should they care? And it's like, why would you raise my taxes to help pay for people that I don't know? And it's like, well, you should care about people, Karen. I don't know.
No, that's socialism, and I won't have it in my capitalist society. How dare you? Socialism in my capitalism?
Socialism? Where? We can talk about socialism in another episode. I do want to talk about that.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this HIV thing, and we're going to jump right to COVID.
Okay,
COVID is so much more compressed. There's so much less to talk about because everything's happening in real time.
Right.
2012, the FDA approved Truvada, which is also known as PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. So this is taken by predominantly gay men, obviously, are going to be taking it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyone, obviously, who doesn't want to be at risk to get HIV. Basically, this is where kind of like it's a cocktail of, I think, 2 different antiretrovirals. And there are all these protocols for how you treat those who want to prevent it and those who have it by giving them different cocktails. Because if you attack a microbe, a virus, with a multitude of things at all different sites of action, there's a far less chance it's going to develop resistance to them. Because there's this idea of an arms race that if you attack it with one thing, it finds a way to avoid it. And then you have to develop a new method, and it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So it's a lot of people call it like gene for gene resistance. It's like one thing targeting one thing, but we want multi-site targeting, because if you target it at multiple sites, it has a lot less chance of actually developing resistance. And if it does, maybe it only develops resistance against one of them and not all of them.
Right.
So with PrEP, I think it's a cocktail of two. But then, for people who actually have HIV, there's like all these different regimens that you get put on for a while. Then you have to switch, and you have to keep changing it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we get people who do live long, healthy lives with HIV, who are undetectable. And that stigma, whole living with HIV thing, that is, please. Oh my
Please
God.
what? Please what?
Like, that's why I was so happy with when Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye talked about it, and and talking about your positive status in a way that's that is positive. That's like, hey, I have it, but I'm taking care of myself. I get tested regularly, et cetera, et cetera. There are all these ways we can as a society educate ourselves on this topic. So you don't have to worry about obviously contracting it, because we know the modes of transmission. As long as you're safe, you're fine.
Yeah.
As long as you're undetectable, you're untransmittable. That's the thing. That's the thing I want everyone to learn.
Yeah, I mean,
if I have kids, that's the first thing I'm teaching them.
I mean, as long as we're finally at a place where people can have HIV and, well, I don't want to say be fine, but they have treatments and that allow them to live long, happy lives. Then I think that the stigma behind I don't think there should be stigma behind HIV in the first place, but we shouldn't have the stigma at all. This kind of brings me into a slightly different topic. Take us there. Because gay men still cannot donate blood if they've been sexually active with another man. And given our current science, our current testing capabilities of blood, and yes, people, it's still being transmitted around HIV, but definitely not as bad as it was. Why is the FDA still regulating gay men giving blood?
Why is the FDA handling it at all? And I asked someone this, because they're like, because blood is a consumable, because the Food and Drug Administration handles all consumable stuff, and since you put it in your body, and I'm like, why isn't the CDC doing it? They're like, they just track diseases. Fine. In 2015, they lifted the ban of gay men not being able to donate at all, and they brought it to a 12-month waiting period. Right. So you had to be asked for a year to give blood. And I think now with COVID, they've reduced it further because they wanted more people to donate blood. I think it's 6 months. But you still have to wait. And I'm like, I love science. Don't get me wrong. As a scientist, I love science. But
we stand science.
Antiquated, because as you know, I get harassed all the time for my blood. I get all these messages about donating blood, and then I have to message them and be like, I'm a gay, sorry, I can't do anything. They're like, no, just don't have sex for 6 months. And I'm like, why would I?
It's like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
I'm tested regularly, thankfully negative. Why can't I just not donate blood? So I think I looked up the testing procedures, and they test all the blood, obviously. And there's like a 1 in a millionth test or sample that goes through that's actually positive instead of negative. 1 in a million. Right. I want to know the stats for other diseases that can be transmitted through blood and how much they go through. Because if any of them are higher, I'm gonna be like, what the fuck? Like,
what the heck?
Go
ahead.
I think as long as you're tested, like your blood is tested then, and you maybe like have a test right before you give the blood, or you test it twice or something. Like, there's gotta be safeguards.
Like if they're still really worried about it, like if I go in to donate blood and I said, oh, I've been sexually active within the last 3 months, can't they just be like, okay, before you give blood, then just take a quick HIV test and then you can do it as long as you test negative?
Because if undetectable is indeed untransmittable, then as long as you're not detectable, you should be fine. Obviously, yeah, if you are confirmed positive, probably don't, just because of the fact that your viral load may go up one day.
Right.
Without you knowing, because maybe you're not tested. It's like between your testings, or maybe you're getting on new medication and it hasn't like gone down yet, whatever. But if you know you're negative, and you're in like a monogamous relationship, or you always use protection, or you're on PrEP, like as long as you're taking care of yourself, they should just test you then, and they should test the blood again before, when it gets to the blood bank, wherever it goes. I have no idea.
Right.
They should just test it.
And I just think it's also like, like, why is it still specifically gay men?
Yeah. Why is it not Haitians anymore? I don't know.
Yeah. Why aren't we testing Haitians? Why aren't we testing what were some of the other populations you said?
Hemophiliacs who get blood transfusions.
Yeah. Why aren't we testing them?
Heroin addicts and homosexuals.
The 4 H's.
The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right there. Yeah, I mean, obviously anyone can get HIV. Yes, it was predominantly in the gay community, at least statistically it was. It was also in communities that don't have great health, access to healthcare, et cetera, or preventative like condoms and things like that.
Yeah, but you're not gonna go around to people and be like, oh, what's your socioeconomic status? You cannot donate blood because you're part of a marginalized community. Like, what?
I'm hoping, because then you had all those people. You had a few of those people who recovered from COVID, who were gay and wanted to donate their blood for their plasma, because it was seen as a possible treatment plan. Because if you had your antibodies in your blood, it could be filtered out, and you can just give your antibodies to someone else if they're severely sick.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that Trump had done when he was sick. He got antibody treatment, so could have been a gay man's antibodies. We'll never know. But they wanted to, and like I think it was what's his name? He has that late night show. Gay Icon was like, I can't donate. I should be able to, but we have these archaic rules that don't let me. Like
Gay Icon.
Yeah, Gay Icon. I can't remember the name of. So iconic. But it's infuriating, especially because when I was younger, I donated blood all the time. And the only difference was I wasn't sexually active. And of course, the moment I become sexually active, it's like, what? My blood's off the table? Like,
I mean, we could talk about this too forever. And
yeah. Let's get to COVID.
Okay, yeah. Topical.
COVID is pretty compressed because it's so recent. But, 2019, a billion years ago now. End of 2019, literally December 31st. The World Health Organization picked up a media statement by some guy in Wuhan in China, saying that there was some viral pneumonia. No idea what it was, obviously, but there were cases of it.
Right.
2020, the cursed year.
Cursed.
First week, 2020, Dr. Fauci is already brought into this sort of intra-agency task force to look at this problem. January 11th, you've got the first death from the virus, presumably, I think, in Wuhan. January 13th, Thailand is the first country to report a case outside of China.
Right.
And it's at the same time that we have the first protocol to diagnose the virus through something called RT-PCR, which is reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction.
Hello?
Basically, you just take RNA, you convert it to DNA, and then you can, if you know the DNA sequence, you can confirm whether or not the virus is there or not.
Okay.
It's not fast, it's expensive-ish, so it wasn't the best testing, but that was the first type of test that we had to confirm the virus was in a blood sample or not. And by January 20th, you have Dr. Fauci already saying that the NIH is working on a vaccine for the virus.
Wow, really early.
Yeah, well, it's a little optimistic, if you ask me. The 21st, you have the first United States case. And on the 22nd, Trump received his first public question about it.
Oh.
Whether or not he was concerned about the coronavirus. And Trump quote, no, not at all. And we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China. It's going to be fine.
One person coming from China.
So well, if you think about it.
Because I think most of our cases came from Europe, actually, or that's where it was mostly transmitted from.
And then by the end of January, the New York Times reported that Trump was told at the time of a January 29th memo by trade advisor Peter Navarro that the coronavirus could cause as many as 500,000 deaths and trillions in economic damage. Further, on the 30th, Secretary Azar warned President Trump about the possibility of a pandemic. So there's that whole thing where Biden's always like, Trump knew in late January, early February, he knew it was going to be a problem. He chose to. And this is Times reporting on those memos. February 11th, we have the coronavirus, now called COVID-19. This is what World Health Organization says specifically. Following best practices, the name of the disease was chosen to avoid inaccuracy and stigma, and therefore did not refer to a geographical location, an animal, an individual, or group of people, even though Trump is call it, the China virus. So they knew. The World Health Organization knew. They're like, we can't call it that because it's just all the Chinese people are going to get shit on because of it, and it's not their fault. It was just viruses jump from other animal to human systems frequently. It just happens. It just happened to be in China. We don't have to say and stigmatize that it's the Chinese people's fault that it happened. It's not.
Right. And I think the story that Trump is trying to push is that China didn't handle the virus properly, and therefore, it's their fault that, the entire rest of the world ended up having it. But we didn't do a very good job either because, look at us.
Yeah, look at us now. We're thriving.
So I think that if coronavirus had started in the U.S., which you never know, it could have. But if it started in the U.S., would everyone be calling it the America virus? What would we
say? They call it the Trump virus.
The Trump virus. It is the Trump virus, honestly.
Oh God.
But yeah, the whole stigma behind diseases that you can't control sounds familiar, right?
I wonder where all the money's going. We don't have enough money for him. So February 24th, this is also another great tweet that aged so well. President Trump tweets the coronavirus is very much under control in the United States. CDC and World Health Organization has been working very hard and very smart. So he's praising the World Health Organization. Now, skip to April 14th. President Trump announces his decision to halt U.S. funding to World Health Organization. So a month before, he's like, 2 months before, he's like, it's great, I love it, they're doing a fantastic job. Now in April, he's like, we can't have it. And then the World Health Organization clapped back, and they were like, we told everyone January 5th that it was a problem. We had a global response starting on the 6th, the day after, and we've always provided updates for everyone to go on our website. They look at it weekly, basically, and just provide updates for everyone. So
defund who?
Yeah, defund who? And then we're getting close to current, present day. June 16th, a United Kingdom trial showed that dexamethasone, which is a corticosteroid which reduces inflammation and things like that, is actually life-saving for those in critical condition. I'm assuming because COVID in severe cases causes way too much inflammation.
Right.
So World Health Organization is trying to get that information out. And at the same time, they're trying to get rid of the whole hydroxychloroquine crap.
Oh, God. Right.
Because they found, after randomized studies, that it had no effect, no positive effect on COVID patients. And yet Trump, the Republicans, kept glorifying it. They were like, oh, just take some hydroxychloroquine. It's great. I've been hearing great things about it. And then there was that whole video with that whole fake ass doctor saying, I've given it to 1 billion patients in my, home, wherever she's from. And she's like, they're all doing fine now. And I'm like, you're lying.
Oh my God, what? Was that a thing?
Oh, I'll have to, maybe I'll link that ridiculous video in this description, because there's this video where this one doctor, this woman's talking about how she used it on a bunch of her patients and they're all doing fine now. And I'm like, where's the evidence? Where's the fact?
Where
is it?
Read the manuals. Read the books.
Read the manuals. October 2nd, Trump and Melania test positive for COVID, which was, I'm not shocked.
not surprised.
And then finally, just 2 days ago, October 30th, the U.S. passed 9 million cases of COVID-19 with a little over 200,000 dead because of it. So this is where we are now.
In 1 year.
In less than a year. So I think the comparisons between the two show, science has definitely gotten better. Within a much more compressed time frame, we can identify a disease identify somewhat its mode of action and its route in terms of its infection route. We don't have a lot of good treatments for it, unfortunately. But when it comes to the politicization of it and how the government responded to it, it's still garbage.
Right.
It's still trash. We didn't learn shit. That's what I'm trying to say.
So here's a different question. So do you think if HIV happened, advance it like 40 years or so, if HIV happened this year, and we had the first reported case of it this year, do you think it would be better, it would be worse? How do you think we would have responded to it?
I'd hope it was better, obviously, because the tools we have alone are much better than what we had in the 80s and the 90s in terms of like scientific techniques, instruments, and things like that. I think it would still be overly politicized. And I think oh god, I was not around in the 80s, obviously.
Right.
I was barely around in the 90s. I don't know from firsthand experience how gay men were treated. I know from looking at some scary ass stories how they were treated. But just today, with like Trump's inflammatory base, if they caught wind that the HIV virus was like a gay virus, it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
It's like the whole marriage equality gone. Can't
Time to take away their rights.
Yeah, like from a scientific standpoint, it'd be great. I think it would be like another thing where it's like a very compressed timeline. We'd learn a lot of information a lot faster.
Right.
In terms of the politicization, the stigma of it, it'd still be a huge problem.
Right. And that kind of leads me into my last question, because we're over time.
Sorry, I'm just so impassioned about it.
So right, my last question: if the HIV pandemic, let's say, didn't happen in the 80s, do we think that the whole LGBT rights movements, do you think that would have been quicker, faster, being that all the stigma that arose from the HIV pandemic wouldn't have existed?
Well, it's tragic, obviously.
Yeah.
What happened? But there was a lot of activism for obviously destigmatizing the whole virus portion of it, but that does translate to destigmatizing homosexuality. It permeates that as well. So I think if I could erase it from history, I would 100%.
Yeah,
but there were a lot of people who came up from that. Also, a lot of like a lot of actors and actresses and things were bringing the public eye to it, which was great. And an actor gets the HIV virus, people start tuning in and caring about it.
Right.
So it did bring a lot of attention to it, and therefore brought a lot of attention to the LGBTQ community, specifically gay men, because they're the ones kind of suffering from it. I don't know if you would have got it faster if HIV wasn't a thing. I think you'd have a lot more gay men celebrating their equality now, should it not have been a thing, or should it have been better handled.
Right.
But, yeah, that's a whole other topic, though, the whole, LGBTQ rights movement and getting where we are today, which isn't perfect, by the way. Still a lot of rights we don't have that I would like to have. But
now that Amy Coney Barrett is on the Supreme Court, we are being threatened. Anyway, we are over time. So, yes. Pat, what are your final words to give out to everyone about this topic?
Definitely look into your history if you want to, not repeat it. Like, there is a lot you can learn from just Googling some shit, and then, and don't fall into the whole stigma trap. Like, don't let them play you like that. Rise above.
Yes, no need to discriminate against a group of people just because, a virus or a disease originated within a specific group or from a specific country. Cough, cough.
Yeah. Cough, cough.
At least that's how I see it. COVID?
You were coughing. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Have you gotten tested recently?
I have not, and it's because I'm not qualified.
What does that mean? I was tested like last week. I'm
Don't
fine.
you get it through your degree
Yeah, I do.
though? Yeah, so I went onto the website. I was like, can I get a COVID test? And they make you fill out like this form, and it's basically if you don't have any symptoms and if you're not in a high risk situation, then they're like, you shouldn't be tested.
So you're
Um,
boring.
well, I mean, I don't go out that often because I work from home, um, and I'm not like in one of those situations that would require that. Uh, so yeah, I can't get tested unless I have symptoms.
Well, don't get sick. You'll be fine.
Well, anyway, let's sign off, and then we'll catch everybody in the next episode. So I'm Matt Klubeck.
I'm perpetually hating Ronald Reagan for his mishandling of the HIV epidemic. Patrick.
All right, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah.